back to the rundown. Well, we just discussed the issue of Norway labeling West Bank products as coming as settlement products as such. And of course, that plays into the BDS movement. So does this also the story. There's something called the Mapping Project. It's an online effort by a Boston area pro-Palestinian group aligned to the Boycott, Divest and Sanction, or BDS movement, that provides the exact locations and names of staff members of Jewish organizations and institutions throughout Massachusetts. Now, the group says that it provides local institutional support for the colonization of Palestine, also links these Jewish groups to other domestic anti-progressive causes in the U.S. But the map casts a wide net. It includes not only Jewish political and social organizations such as AIPAC and ADL, but even Jewish schools, arts clubs, synagogues, and philanthropic groups. Now, local communal leaders in the Boston area say the initiative is nothing less than an effort to catalog and intimidate Boston's Jewish community. And among those criticizing are 4 Democratic members of Congress who have now condemned the Mapping Project, with even the Representative Ayanna Pressley, who is seen as a leading House progressive, stating, quote, "It is unacceptable to target or make vulnerable Jewish institutions or organizations, full stop." Well, joining us in studio is attorney and CEO of the International Legal Forum, Arsen Ostrowski. Arsen, I can't remember another time likely where you and Representative Pressley would have would be on the same side of an Israel-related issue. You've been speaking out on it too. In one of your tweets, you wrote, "BDS Boston is mapping out synagogues and Jewish-owned businesses, properties, and institutions as targets for incitement to racial hatred and violence. In other words, laying the groundwork for Kristallnacht 2.0. Very strong words. How do you, in a sense, justify that?
Look, I stand by those words 100%. I mean, what we've seen is just absolutely jarring, which is just reminiscent of some of the darkest days in history and really millennia-old stereotypes and anti-Semitic tropes against the Jewish people. We've seen mapping done against our people before. We know how it ends. It does not end pretty. It incites violence, it incites racial hatred against Jews as individuals, against Jewish communities, Jewish institutions. You mentioned also synagogues and schools as well. I think what this really does underscore at the end of the day is that the BDS as a movement is rooted to the core in Jew hatred.
Right. Let me ask you, as a lawyer, obviously in the United States, especially where freedom of speech is such as an absolute right, the authorities are unlikely to get involved, even though we've heard government figures speak out against it. Is there anything legally that could be done, even in a civil way, to suggest that they may be putting or inciting against these Jewish organizations and individuals, we should say?
Potentially, yes. I mean, even free speech is not an absolute right. When such speech has a real direct impact and potential incitement to violence, yes, that can be a problem. And yes, legal action can be taken in that regard, including with the police, including with the legal authorities, in order to stop this kind of rhetoric, in order to take potentially criminal and or civil proceedings against groups like the BDS that promote this kind of rhetoric, this kind of pervasive rhetoric, and also those who support this organization promoting such tropes and incitement against Jewish community.
Now, I did mention, kind of saying it almost kind of humorously, that we've seen progressives, even a member of the so-called squad, coming out strongly in condemning this. So maybe comment on that in this case you see the BDS movement going so far that even that uniting people that might normally be sympathetic to their cause.
Look, it wasn't just a member of Congress Presley, also Senator Elizabeth Warren, who's also one of most ardent critics, certainly, of Israel as well. She came out very strongly against this, as did Richie Torres, a leading progressive as well.
Right, though he's pro-Israel.
He is indeed, but others have been openly critical in the past. So I think this specific call by the BDS Boston movement really went and crossed over all red lines. This isn't a mere discussion about settlements pro or against. This is sheer Jew hatred, pure and simple.
All right. Austin, stay with us because it's on a related story. The United Nations Human Rights Council, which is viewed by Israel and its supporters as an institution deeply biased against the Jewish state, is set to officially release tomorrow its full report on potential war crimes committed during the latest major conflict between Israel and Hamas in Gaza last May. Austin, I think we know what we could expect here.
Yeah, look, I mean, you don't have to be Nostradamus here. You know, there are two things certain in life, death and taxes. We can add a third, that Israel will always be found guilty before the United Nations. And we knew this from the very beginning, from the very fact that when this resolution mandating this commission was created, it did not even mention Hamas, not even once. And this commission was created in the wake of Hamas firing some almost 4,500 rockets at us. And if there was ever any doubt about where this commission was heading, or the fact that this inquiry was anything but predetermined, their decision to appoint Navi Pillay, a woman who has a long-standing visceral hostility and bias against Israel, a woman who has already charged as guilty of war crimes, crimes against humanity, apartheid, and violations of international law arising out of the very investigation that she's meant to adjudicate in. We know from the very beginning how this will end, and we know that they found guilty before the ink was even dry on this resolution.
Right. I do want to broaden this out a bit because the Biden administration has tried to take a different approach than the previous administration, saying in some way we're going to try to engage with the UN, with some of these, particularly even these institutions in the UN, which we know are biased, engage with them, maybe put members on them, see if we can, in effect, work reforms on the inside. How do you think this report or the release of this report plays into that argument, let's say, that's been made, or the discussion about that?
Look, I mean, I think despite however well-intentioned the administration's goals may have been, I think this ought to once and for all put an end to the charade that it is possible in any way to move the Human Rights Council for good. It's the same Human Rights Council that counts Venezuela, China and Cuba as its members, the same council that has condemned Israel almost more times than the whole world put together, where Israel is the only country that is a standalone item on the agenda of the council. So I think this body is something that is truly irredeemable, unfortunately. It is rooted in a pathological obsession with Israel, and to the core is a cesspool of, I think, hatred and discrimination against the Jewish state.
All right, and just briefly, your group, others expected to make some kind of response to what's going to be released?
Correct. I mean, the report itself was released a few days ago, and tomorrow the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, they will formally launch it with a big event, the opening session. Our organisation, the International Legal Forum, put out a major report with a coalition of 25 organisations around the world exposing Navi Pillay specifically for her bias, the fact that her lack of impartiality goes against the very core of the UN's own requirements and guidelines for impartiality and objectivity. We're working with members in Congress as well as allies in Europe as well to ensure that they speak out when this report is formally presented tomorrow, that they do not lend any credence to this really one-sided and fixed inquiry against the Jewish state.